All right, so in this video, we're going to delve back into disjunctions. I'm going to teach you what the parts of a disjunction are, and I'm going to give you two interpretations of how we can read a disjunction. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves what a disjunction is. Disjunction. Okay, there are sentences of the form either P or Q. Okay, either you're in or you're out is that's a disjunction. Sometimes we don't always say the either. We just say you're in or you're out. We don't always say the either, but sometimes we do, and it's a little more clear. Okay, and just as a reminder, as a review, either P or Q is equivalent to if not P, then Q. Okay, so remember, either you go to your room or you're grounded. That's the same as saying if you don't go to your room, then you're grounded. Okay, so there's our review. Okay, now here's the new parts. In this, sentence is conditional where there were names for the parts. The not P right here, that's going to be our antecedent. And the Q here is going to be our consequent. Okay, so that's review. Now, these parts of the disjunction also have names. The P and the Q, they have the same word name, and they are called disjuncts. Okay, each is a disjunct. So P is a disjunct, Q is a disjunct. So if I say either you go to your room or you're grounded, one of the disjuncts is you go to your room. The other disjunct is you're grounded. Okay, and just like with antecedent conditional, the if is not part of the antecedent, the then is not part of the consequent. Similarly, the either is not part of the disjunct, and the or is not part of the disjunct. The disjunct is just the P and the Q. Okay, and the reason there's different labels for antecedent and consequent because it actually matters which comes first. Like saying if Max is a pug, then Max is a dog. That's saying something different from if Max is a dog, then Max is a pug. You might go from a true statement to a false statement by saying that. But for disjunctions, the order actually doesn't matter. You could say either you go to your room or you're grounded. That's the same thing as saying either you're grounded or you go to your room. Okay, so for disjunctions, the order doesn't make a difference to whether the disjunction is true. It does make a difference for a conditional like this. Okay, so that's kind of the first thing to get out of this video lesson. Now next, I'm going to teach two ways of interpreting a disjunction. Okay, so the first is what's called an exclusive disjunction. Okay, an exclusive disjunction, and down here I'll write what the other interpretation, which is called an inclusive disjunction. Okay, now how are these two things different? Inclusive disjunction, exclusive disjunction. So these are both different interpretations of the disjunction. Okay, the exclusive disjunction says that, okay, its key part says both disjuncts, you're both the P and the Q. Okay, so both disjuncts cannot be true. Okay, so when you interpret a disjunction as an exclusive disjunction, you're saying either this or that and not both. Both cannot be true. So let's say there's a parent with their child and they say, you can get either the hamburger or the hot dog. I'll just make it clear that it's a disjunction. Either you get the hamburger or the hot dog. Okay. Now, if we wanted to see the full sentence, we would say either you get the hamburger or you get the hot dog. This, just saying the hot dog, that's not a full proposition, and so the second disjunct, you can't just say the hot dog. Uh, the full disjunction would be either you get the hamburger or you get the hot dog. But or you get the hot dog. But oftentimes in ordinary language, we kind of abbreviate things just because it's easier to say. But strictly speaking, a disjunction will have a full proposition as each of its disjuncts. Okay, now let's get back to the main point. When you say either you get the hamburger or you get the hot dog, okay, to the child, um, you, you either get this or you get that. And you can kind of say it forcefully. And the child says, well, I want both. And you're like, well, no, you either get one or the other, right? Um, in that case, the parent is often meaning you can only have one. And so they're meaning their disjunction to be interpreted as an exclusive disjunction. Both disjuncts cannot be true. Okay. So sometimes when we lay out a disjunction to people, we mean to only say that only one of them can be true, not both. Okay. All right. Now an inclusive disjunction is different. For an inclusive disjunction, we mean for it to be interpreted so that both disjuncts can be true. Okay. Now, in what case might we interpret an inclusive disjunction as both disjunctions possibly being true? Well, suppose you notice somebody's kind of been acting out and having some irrational behaviors. Maybe it's one of your friends, and somebody says this. I'll mean this to be quotes. So somebody says, either they're lonely or they're bored. Says either they're lonely or they're bored. Now somebody says, yeah, or they could be both, and the person's like, great, yeah, they could be both, right? Either they're lonely or they're bored, and they might be both. It's got to be one of them though. Either they're lonely or they're bored, and that's why they're acting up. But when somebody says that in some contexts, right, they don't mean this sentence to be interpreted that it can only be one or the other. They're not meaning this for this to be interpreted as an exclusive disjunction. They're meaning to have this interpreted as an inclusive disjunction. Okay, so let's kind of tie these thoughts together. Okay, for a disjunction, at least one of these has to be true. Okay, and all understandings of disjunction has it that at least one of the disjuncts have to be true. Okay, it's just that exclusive disjunction says that the disjunction is not true if both are true. Okay, you can't interpret it so that both disjuncts are true. On the inclusive disjunction, both disjuncts can be true. All right. So that's our two interpretations. Now, there's actually debate among logicians and even philosophers of language, which is whether actually then disjunctions are ambiguous between an exclusive disjunction reading or an inclusive disjunction reading. Are they whether they're ambiguous? So these are two genuine ways, genuine like different meanings of a disjunction. Okay, either they do that or they think that there's actually one meaning, okay, and then there's some other way to understand why we have like these two interpretations. So, for example, some people think that the inclusive disjunction is the actual meaning. Like for a disjunction, we mean for it to be interpreted so that both disjuncts could be true, okay, but it's a conversational implicature that both cannot be true. Okay, and so the true meaning of a disjunction is as an inclusive disjunction. But exclusive disjunction is not an actual part of the meaning of a disjunction. It's more the conversational implicature is that both cannot be true. In some contexts, we might mean it to be implied that both disjuncts cannot be true. You can't get both the hamburger and the hot dog. Okay. Now, if you didn't understand just that last part when I started talking about one interpretation is that disjunctions are ambiguous between these two meanings, or there's one meaning and then this one is actually just the implicature. If you didn't follow all that to a T, that's okay. The main point is just to understand that disjunctions, either at least one of them have to be true. On the exclusive disjunction interpretation, both cannot be true, or the disjunction becomes false. Okay. On the inclusive disjunction, both could be true, and the disjunction would still be true. Okay. So there we go. We got a little deeper into disjunctions.